In this video, I will be repairing and painting this 3D printed model. It sat in this tray on a very messy desk in a heavily trafficked part of the house for several months, and as you can see, it needs a lot of work. But before I can do anything else, I'm going to need to go through this tray and find all of the little broken bits and pieces. Okay, we've got 3 legs and some awning posts, plus a few other little details that are broken. Now, the reason this ended up the way it did is because when I originally assembled it, I glued these awnings on. And then I realized that I wasn't going to be able to access the cargo to paint it, so I tried to get them off again. It didn't work. I'll get it standing on its own 6 feet and be right back. Well, that was 3 steps forward and 1 step back. The legs went back on perfectly, and the awning posts are about as good as they're going to get. But when I tried to reattach this little rope here, the end kept snapping off in tiny little chunks. So eventually I just broke most of it off so that I could replace it with a new one. The new rope will be made out of heavy-duty fishing line and size 15 seed beads. The beads are a little bit bigger than they should be, but it's the closest thing I can get. I figured it would be easier to glue it in 2 places than in 5. Thankfully, the fishing line is pretty close to the same size as the original rope was. This is a nasty, crusty, half-dried up tube of superglue. It's one of several things that made this project more difficult than it needed to be. I'm adding a tiny drop of it to the end of the original rope, and then sliding one of the seed beads halfway on. This leaves one end open for adding the fishing line. It took several attempts to get this right, but we're seeing the one that actually worked. While we're sitting around waiting for the glue to dry, I can tell you a little bit about this model. This Beetle Beast of Burden was designed by Mini Monster Mayhem. You can buy the STL file from myminifactory.com. I'll include a link in the description below. If anyone decides to add this to their collection, just be sure to handle it more carefully than I did. And also, don't glue the awnings on until after you've painted everything. Enter the dullest nail clippers in existence. These were absolutely the wrong tool for the job. They're the wrong tool for any job. I really, really need to throw these things away. Why do I keep stuff that doesn't work? Ugh, get these out of my side. Anyway, they barely even dented this fishing line, and I'm just lucky that I didn't yank it out of the bead that I glued it into. Despite the trouble, I have a new rope attached, and now all I need to do is add the beads and glue them in place. Finally, the last piece. I just have to put it in place and then hold really still until it dries. The model is now fully repaired and primed. The primer does a pretty good job of hiding the repairs, like this little face dealie that I made off camera. And the new rope almost blends in. I planned on priming this in white, but the spray can wouldn't work, and I didn't want to take the time to go buy a new one, so I just grabbed a can of gray primer that I had on hand instead. I will regret this decision very shortly. But first, I'm going to regret picking up this worn-out old paintbrush, which is doing a terrible job of applying the paint. Problematic tools and materials are becoming a running theme with this project. I've swapped that brush out for a new but unreasonably small brush, and now I can fully appreciate what an unfortunate choice the gray primer was. I'm using Citadel contrast paint, which is designed to pool and settle into details to create a shading effect. This shows up really well on a white base, but not so well against this medium gray shade. The one possible benefit of the gray as a primer is that it only takes one coat of black to cover it. If I'd used the white, it might have taken more. One snack break later, and I can pick up where I left off in painting the Beetle black. For this part, I am using just a basic black acrylic paint. It's nothing special. In fact, the tube says basic. I also managed to find a slightly larger brush before starting in with the black paint. This definitely made a difference in how long it took to cover the area that I needed to. Tiny brushes are only really good for small spaces and details, like between these tassels. I just wish that the actual painting time had been as quick as the edited video, because I was getting impatient with this and I was really looking forward to the next part. That's where this project gets fun. What I'm brushing on here is ZTH Hypershift pigment. It's a very fine iridescent powder that can be mixed into a clear paint base, added to resin, or in this case, brushed directly onto a model. I will be adding a matte finish clear spray to seal it in place, but that will be off camera. I don't feel like I'm showing this pigment's true potential here, so I'll be linking a video below from the channel Dip Your Car, which shows it off on a greater scale. Color shifting pigment powders like this are pretty pricey, but thankfully, you only need a teeny tiny amount for a project like this, so a little goes a long way. The gloss clear coat that I'm using here is just what I happen to have on hand, and is not necessarily what I would recommend. The reason I wanted a brush-on gloss coat is so that I could control where it went on the model. I only wanted the Beetle to be shiny, and not any of the other details. That's also why I used a matte finish clear spray to seal the pigment powder in place. The matte spray did dull down the appearance of the pigment powder, but thankfully the gloss coat is bringing it back. Sometime I'll have to test to see if a spray sealant is even necessary, or if a brush-on clear coat can be applied directly without disturbing the powder. I'll also have to try a bunch of different gloss coats to see what looks the best, and is the least messy and stinky. Here, I'm trying to correct the problem I ran into with the gray primer by painting most of the remaining areas white. Hopefully, this will make it so that the contrast paints, especially the lighter colors, show up well and shade in the details better. That is, if the extra layer of paint doesn't fill in the fine details too much first. I really would have been better off going out and buying a new can of white primer. Okay, off with the cat shield and on with the show. Thankfully, we're nearing the final act of this production, but before the curtain call, I have a little more painting to do. I skipped to the end of this part because I figured, with as bored as I was getting of actually doing the painting, it couldn't be that much fun to watch the entire process. Perhaps with a more skilled painter and a better filming setup it would be, but I'm definitely not there yet, as evidenced by the rather blotchy awnings, although that might be partly due to the extra base coat. I'm using a Molotow liquid chrome pen and a disposable eyeliner brush to paint the metal details. I opted for the disposable brush because the ink from this pen is supposedly waterproof when dry, and I didn't want to take any chances on not being able to wash it out of my nice brushes. The disposable brush actually did a pretty nice job, although the size of the handle does make it a little bit more challenging to control. This liquid chrome ink does have a really nice shiny metallic look, and while I haven't tried a lot of other metallic paints, I liked the results from this pen better than any of the paints that I have tried. It is only available in silver though, so I'll have to keep looking around for some other options that are equally good but in other colors of metal. The final step, gluing the awnings on. I should have waited until this point to glue them on in the first place. I'm using a much better glue this time, at least it's less crusty. It's still a little difficult getting the awnings on though, because the posts are a little wonky after having been broken and glued back together. So everything's a little crooked and uneven, but hey, they're on. And it's done. It looks a little bit blotchy and garish to me, so I'm honestly not super happy with the results, but I am really happy to be finished.